All right. Welcome back to Cluster B of the personality disorders. There are four different personality disorders in this section, three in Cluster A, three in Cluster C. Here's the largest of the four, Cluster B. And as I mentioned in the last video, I want to make sure that you are, in addition to listening to these videos, go and look in the module. I've got a set of lecture notes for you that gives you a quick little overview and summary of all 10 of these. Then I give you a handout for Cluster A, Cluster B, and Cluster C that gives you more detailed information on each of these 10. That's a lot of information, but that's just kind of the way it goes when you're studying the personality disorder. So don't get too hung up on the differences. I want you to get a good handle. So it's intended to be just a good little overview and introduction into what they are and how they look. Cluster B, the four personality disorders in this cluster are all related to each other. They're all different, but they're also all related to each other in that these are personality disorders where the traits tend to be more emotional or erratic or dramatic. So there's four of these that kind of go on this kind of cluster. Cluster A was the odd, eccentric, schizophrenia-like. These four, which I think are more commonly diagnosed in cluster B, are more easily seen there, and there is some overlap between the four. So the four that we have in cluster B is we have antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. Very, very interesting. My hunch is you've heard of at least one or two of those: antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic. So let's talk about each of those. The first one is a big one: antisocial personality disorder. My hunch is you probably have heard of that. Now, first thing is this: the term antisocial does not mean doesn't like to socialize. We sometimes use that language. Someone's kind of antisocial means they don't like to socialize. In this context, antisocial means against society. Against society. I don't know if you like to watch some certain movies, like gangster movies, like The Godfather, or watch shows like The Sopranos or Goodfellas, or maybe you like to watch some of those reality TV shows like American Greed. I like that one. The First 48, which shows kind of the investigation of a murder, the first 2 days of a murder investigation. If you've ever watched any of those shows or any of those movies, you have seen antisocial personality disorder, because this is a personality disorder that is characterized by chronic lack of regard for the safety, security, and well-being of other people. People with antisocial personality disorder do not care about the rights of other people or the laws of society. As is oftentimes said, people with this personality disorder know the difference between right and wrong. They just don't care. Most of us know the difference between right and wrong, and we care. Right and wrong influences our behavior. But there are people in our world today that they know what's right, they know what's wrong, they just don't care. They're just going to do whatever they want to do, and they don't care what anyone else thinks about it. So they're overly selfish and self-centered. And as a result of that, the laws of our land and the negative consequences that come with that doesn't modify their behavior. So a chronic disregard for the feelings, rights, and concerns of other people. People with antisocial personality disorder oftentimes are involved in the legal system because they break the law oftentimes. They go and they steal, or they take things, or they take people's money, or whatever it may be, or they rob, or whatever they do. They murder, sometimes in extreme examples. And they don't really have a sense of remorse or regret. It's sad to say, but maybe you've experienced someone like that. Someone who cheats, someone who steals, someone who harms, who hurts, and they go home every night and lay down and go to sleep. And they don't, it's almost like they don't even have like a guilty conscience. And so we sometimes say they don't even have a conscience. Well, there are some folks in our world, emotionally and psychologically, that's kind of how they're wired. That's kind of who they are. It sounds terrible. That's kind of who they are. They have no conscience. They have no remorse. They have no guilt. And so therefore, they're often involved in trouble with the legal system. They break the law oftentimes. And because they're harming people or hurting other people, they often come to the attention of law enforcement. So they're in prison and jail. We see a lot of that in prison and jail populations, a lot of antisocial kind of tendencies and features in that kind of population, especially. We oftentimes see, again, just chronic lying, chronic manipulation, chronic deceit. People with antisocial tendencies tend to be really impulsive. They just do whatever they want to do. They don't care what people think. They don't care. They don't care about the content. They sort of act. So a pattern of impulsivity and impulsive kind of behaviors. Oftentimes they refuse to work. They refuse to provide employment for themselves, or if they do it illegally. It's almost like there's an inability for someone to work legally. And if you've ever worked, I've had some clients through the years that, when they were real honest with themselves and with me, they would say, "Why would I get up and go to work every day? I mean, that's for jokers like you. I'm not going to do why I'm not I don't have to I'm not going to do that. I don't have to do that. I'll just go get what I want. I'm not going to work for it, right?" And so that attitude of I'm not going to work for, why would I work for what I need? I'll just take what I need because I deserve it, right? And so in a way, we'll talk about narcissism here in a minute or two. Many people with antisocial personality disorder have lots of narcissism, that they think the world kind of revolves all around them. Oftentimes they engage in overly aggressive behavior towards, or assaulting kind of behaviors towards other people. They just have this lack of empathy. We sometimes use the word sociopathy, or psychopath, for example, sometimes to refer to kind of extreme examples of that. But we oftentimes see that with antisocial personality disorder. We oftentimes, I mentioned a minute ago that people with this personality disorder oftentimes are involved in illegal activities, so therefore they're involved in the criminal justice system. I hope that you won't just think that people with antisocial personality disorder are like the street criminals. A lot of men and women who work in corporate offices and finance and politics in positions of power, many of them have many of them have antisocial tendencies. They're in it for the power. It's why they're drawn to that. And so, for example, I mentioned a minute ago the show American Greed, which highlights, it's a reality show that highlights what we call white collar crime. So these are professional people. These are people who run businesses and they rip people off. And oftentimes when you watch that show, one of the things you hear people say is they don't care. There's like a lack of it. They don't care. They rip all these old people off, take all their money to buy fancy houses, and they lay down and go to sleep every night. They don't care. They just rationalize and justify. They think that they're owed that, right? So it's not just a street criminal, right? It could also be people in positions of power. So again, the idea is that people often, this is an idea of someone who is against society. Another key idea with antisocial personality disorder is this: many people with this personality disorder are very charming. They're very charismatic. They're usually highly manipulative, and they use their skills, their verbal skills, their personality to charm people and to trick people, to get people into their trust, and then they harm them or take advantage of them. And so those are all we call antisocial tendencies. And again, the word antisocial does not mean won't socialize. It means against society. And so again, this is another common feature, common personality disorder that we oftentimes see in our world today is antisocial personality disorder. That's the first of the four. Here is the second one: borderline personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder is complicated. It is a personality disorder that, again, sort of like antisocial personality disorder, this is a personality disorder where one of the features is manipulation. So people who are who have borderline personality disorder, or borderline features, as we would say, oftentimes can be overly manipulative. They can use threats of harm to harm themselves to kind of get what they want sometimes. But the key feature with borderline personality disorder is this. Number one, chronic patterns of unstable relationships. People with borderline personality disorder have a hard time connecting with people, and they oftentimes use relationships for their advantage. Usually with borderline personality disorder, people with this personality disorder is what we call these two extremes of what's called valuation. So all that means is this. Usually with people with borderline features, maybe you know someone like this. When you first meet them, you are their best friend. They love you. They shower you with praise. As soon as you do something wrong, then you're the worst person, and they kick you out to the curb, right? So usually relationships, there's no middle ground in with people with borderline personality disorder. Most of us know, if you know in relationships, there's lots of middle ground. Things are not always awesome. There's some bad days, there's some good days, some days in between, and most of us kind of understand that. People with borderline personality disorder, it's all bad, all good. I'm either all with you, or I'm not with you at all. So these extremes of what we call valuation, as far as what people believe about relationships and how they see other people. Another common feature of borderline personality disorder is kind of this chronic fear of abandonment. This chronic, really just being terrified that this person who I'm with is going to leave me, or that you're going to think bad of me. So this fear of abandonment, which then results in unstable, unhealthy relationships. And then a big one with borderline personality disorder, it's kind of complicated, is a lack of sense of self. So it's kind of like low self-worth. But with borderline personality disorder, it's kind of a little more complicated than just low self-worth. People with borderline features oftentimes have no self-image. They struggle with really understanding who they are. They feel empty. They feel blank on the inside as far as their person, their personality. For someone, it's been said before, for someone to have a low self-esteem, well, they have to have a self-esteem to start with. It implies if I have a low self-esteem, that implies I have a sense of self. Well, what if someone has no self-esteem? They don't even have a sense of who they are as a person. We often see it's complicated, but we oftentimes see that kind of emotional kind of component to borderline personality disorder. This fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, and a lack of sense of self are common kinds of things. Um, Oftentimes, sort of like antisocial personality disorder, people with borderline personality disorder are often really impulsive, and they may impulsively engage in behaviors. They oftentimes may, because they feel real empty, they may impulsively want to harm themselves or try to harm themselves. They sometimes may threaten other people with, if you don't do this, well, I'm just going to go kill myself. And so we see a lot of that sometimes with people with borderline personality disorder. They may threaten or attempt suicide. In many, many ways, people with borderline personality disorder oftentimes have the symptoms of bipolar disorder, because another feature with borderline personality disorder is this mood shift, a quickly shifting mood, what we sometimes call a flighty mood. Flighty mood is where my mood changes like that, which we can see which we often can see with bipolar disorder. But with borderline personality disorder, oftentimes we see that this is real. These quickly shifting moods from happy to sad to angry, like in a period of time. I remember many, many years ago having a client who, when I was doing some counseling, I went out to the little waiting area. This lady had many, many features of borderline personality disorder. And I went out to the waiting area to have her come back to my office. And as she came back, I noticed she was smiling really, really big, but she had tears running down her face. Now, sometimes we can laugh so hard we cry. I thought she was had been laughing at something, and so that's why she was crying. Well, no, she came in and started talking about this horrible, horrible situation that happened to her with a big old smile on her face. She had this huge smile on her face while she was crying, and there was something about that it was just odd. And I said, "Now, as you're talking to me, are you upset?" Oh, and she was kind of laughing and giggling and smiling while tears were coming down her face. And she had many other features of this personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. So this, what we call this emotional liability, where it's real easily moved, easily molded. Kind of flighty is another term we sometimes use. Again, also too with borderline personality disorder, people sometimes can have like temper outbursts and temper tantrums and screaming and yelling at people or whatever. We see that with borderline personality disorder as well too. So relationships, lack of self-identity, these extremes in relationships. If I love you, I hate you, come here, no, go away, kind of pull. People with borderline personality disorder oftentimes in relationships send these mixed messages of, I need you, I want you, no, I hate you. And so there's this kind of double messages sometimes that we sometimes see. Impulsive kind of behavior, manipulative behavior at times, mood instability, and appropriate expressions of anger, temper tantrums, those kinds of things. So that's borderline personality disorder. Both of those two, all four of these in this section are kind of complicated. There's antisocial against society. There's borderline. I always think about borderline personality disorder with regard of relationships. The idea of most often where we see the problems of borderline personality disorder is in relationships. So that's the first two. Let's talk about histrionic and narcissistic. Histrionic personality disorder. The word histrionic kind of sounds like hysterical, right? So histrionic personality disorder is interesting. This is where a person engages in excessive, dramatic, over-emotional kind of behavior. This is where a person is, I don't want to say a drama queen or a drama king. This is sort of a person who chronically kind of thrives on drama. And their whole life is like a performance on a stage. The word histrionic actually literally means acting. So maybe you've known or worked. I've had clients before who this is kind of their presentation. Everything was a drama. Everything was a presentation. Everything, they couldn't just have a normal conversation with you. Everything had to be all, their language was often really, really verbose, we would say, and real, lots of emotion and lots of stories, and a lot of that. Maybe someone who that's kind of who they are. They live like that, and in kind of unhealthy ways. So someone who's kind of histrionic. This is a person who oftentimes will engage in like unusual dress to draw attention to themselves. Oftentimes, it's seductive or inappropriate dress. Whether it's a man or whether it's a man or a woman, someone who dresses, shows up to a casual gathering in sort of a flowing evening gown and is like, oh, I didn't know that this was casual, or the opposite, shows up to a formal setting in really, really inappropriate dress and says, oh, I didn't know. And you kind of tell that, yeah, you knew. And what they're doing is they're wanting attention. And so that's the histrionic kind of a personality disorder kind of a person who, again, acts in a theatrical manner, lives as if their life is on a stage, always wants to be the center of attention. Similar to, here's an overlap between borderline. So people with histrionic features, their moods often shift quickly. Um, the word flighty is a word I associate with borderline personality disorder. The word fickle is the word I associate with histrionic. Flighty means moods are changing all the time. Fickle means I change my mood to fit whatever situation I want to be in, right? Fickle just means if you're angry, I'm angry. If you're happy, no, I'm happy. Fickle just means I don't really own my emotions. I feel what you feel, right? And so if I'm with someone and they're excited, well, now I'm excited. Well, if they're crying, well, now I'm crying. What we call fickle. Fickle is just this idea of just easily changed. Flighty is where, in a way, there's like sort of a lack of control. My mood is up, my mood is down. It's kind of all over the place. That's more borderline personality disorder. Histrionic is where I kind of manipulate my mood to look a certain way to kind of get your attention or to get your agreement or whatever. If you're excited, well, now, and so kind of a fake mood kind of thing. We call fickle. So people with histrionic personality disorder oftentimes act that way. Lots of drama, lots of showy, lots of, again, it's lots of drama. And one drama after another, after another, after another. That's more what's called histrionic. Lots of emotional breakdown, lots of tears, lots of laughing. Again, in kind of an inappropriate, maybe kind of in inappropriate ways. Maybe you've been in situations with someone where you think to yourself, okay, you can kind of dial it back a little bit. It's okay, just real verbose, real. That's histrionic personality disorder. And again, the term personality disorder implies that what I just described, imagine a person who that's their lifestyle. That's kind of how they act all the time. That's how they are all the time. That would be histrionic personality or borderline personality. Someone who, all those symptoms I mentioned to you before, borderline. Imagine a lifestyle of it. That's kind of how they are kind of all the time, consistently. That would be a personality disorder. And then the last one is narcissistic. This is the fourth one in this cluster B. And again, my hunch is you probably know, if I were to ask you, what does the term narcissistic mean? Well, it means self-centered. And so this is one, to me, antisocial personality disorder, which we just talked about, and narcissistic are like cousins. They're to me, they're closely related. They're different, but they're closely related. Someone who's narcissistic isn't necessarily antisocial. They're just wrapped up into themselves. So this is a person who just is grandiose and is in love with themselves. This is a person who has a desperate need, a lifestyle of a desperate need for attention and acknowledgement. They feel they're better than everybody else. They know they're special. They try to convince you they're special. And they get angry when you don't recognize how special and awesome they are. Overly self-centered. A lot of antisocial people who have antisocial tendencies are also narcissistic. These two oftentimes kind of go together. People with narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic features have an overinflated, a grandiose sense of who they are. Oftentimes, many people with narcissism, they really have accomplished some good things in their lives, but they're going to try to convince you that they have achieved and obtained multiple. They sort of blow it up, right? And they're on their way of even getting more and more and more and more. They may not be making any of their bills right now, but they're going to convince you, hey, listen, I'm about to get it. I'm about to come into a bunch of money. I'm going to make $1 million next year. Even though they're basically meeting their bills now, it's always grandiose and whatever it may be, really, really into themselves. They have this idea of specialness. They have this belief system that they are better than everybody else and they are special, and people ought to understand how special they are. They often exploit people for their own needs because they just don't care. They have sort of like any social personality, they have a lack of empathy. They don't care about other people. They care about themselves. And so they're going to take advantage of you to get what they want. We see it with antisocial. We see it with narcissistic. Just sort of a lack of empathy. They get angry and frustrated when they aren't the center of attention, sort of like histrionic a little bit, but a little bit more into themselves, right? And so people who are narcissistic may not really, draw a lot of attention to themselves like the histrionic person will, but they are into themselves. Many people with narcissistic personality disorder, maybe you know someone like this, they have kind of a victim mentality, and they think that that the world has given them the short end of the stick, and that they deserve better than what they have because of who they are, not because of what I've earned, but because of who I am. And they look around and see other people with nicer stuff, and they feel like I should have that. Why do they get that? I want that. So this victim mentality. They also sometimes, people with narcissism oftentimes have what's called an entitlement mentality. They have this belief that because of who I am, I just deserve good things. I'm not going to work for those things, but I deserve because that's what I want. So it's against narcissistic. They believe that other people who have good things probably got those things by luck, and that they don't deserve those things. I deserve those things. So it's part of why sometimes we see narcissistic personality disorder. People can have antisocial tendencies. So because of that belief, they go take stuff, they steal stuff, they rob or whatever, because you know I, I'm entitled to it. They don't need it. Why do they have it? I want it. More narcissistic and antisocial a little bit, right? So this idea of narcissism is, again, this lifestyle, this pattern of persistent, selfish, self-centeredness, lack of empathy, not caring about anybody else. Um, Again, this idea that, again, I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of an example of someone who I worked with many, many years ago. When I asked them, to tell me, as far as I was asking them about, what they thought about other people and how other people viewed them, and this guy said, "Why would I care? I don't care what people think about me. Why would I care? I mean, I don't care what people think about me." And in a way, at first, it came across as really strong and confident. I don't care what people think about me. And then he finally said, "Why would I care about other people?" He said, "All I care about is me. I know what I think about me, and I'm awesome, right? I don't care. Why would I care what people think about me? I don't care. Why would? Since when do I care about other people?" And I felt like saying to this guy, "Well, at least you're honest, right?" And so he is very narcissistic, really just into himself, right? So this personality, this lifestyle of narcissism, right? So in this section, this cluster B, these are four fairly common, much more common, I think, than cluster A: antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. All of these have kind of a commonality of emotional, erratic, kind of dramatic kind of behavior, right? There can be a lot of overlap between these four, especially in addition to the other six. But these cluster B, I want you to come back to the next video. Cluster C is our last three. We have three more. And we want to talk about more of the anxiety related kind of anxiety disorders. Come back for cluster C. I'll see you next time.